I want to talk about, and I'm preaching to the converted, but I want to talk about the importance of the ono of the soil, and particularly Hiniahuoni. We talk about papa, but Hiniahuoni is the creation of a female form out of the soil from which life was breathed to create the first humanoids. So that particular story tells us that we have a lot of reverence, particularly for Hiniahuoni, because that's the source of that soil life for us. Now, I'll just get a hold of the technology. I think that'll work. So who am I? Nā tauki mata whaurua te waka, ko hokianga nui a kupe te moana, ko whakatere manawa kai aia te maonga, ko tūhirangi te marae, ko ngāpui a hau, tuturu ma hurihuri, ko rahere te tāngata. So that's who I am, ko Rob Small toku ingoa. So on the side of my mother, I come from a hapu, which is in the Mahurihuri area, which is the area between Kaikoe and Rawini. And so that fertile valley has nourished our people for many, many years. That's where Kupe came originally and brought 3 dogs, a black dog, a blue dog, and a red dog. And he left the black dog in the Waimā Valley. And my great-great-great-grandmother was Te Kuri o Te Wao. She was the dog of the forest. And in fact, she was a matakite, a seer. And so what happened is when, for instance, when the Tangiwai disaster happened, that dog would appear before people who were handed the mantle of being that matakite. So it's a strongly spiritual story which has grounded me for most of my life. So I want to talk first of all about Māori organic agriculture. And this was founded in the far north in Taitokare under a number of people, Geneva Hildreth, Percy Tipene, and those people created what was known as TOPIS, which was the Taitokare Organic Producers Society. And eventually that kaupapa was taken to Ratana, and that system that they created, which we call Hua Parakore, was endorsed by the collective iwi in that particular forum. So Te Waka Kaiora is the legitimate holder of Maori organic food production. Te Waka Kaiora has 6 principals. We've got a couple of graduates, 3 graduates at the back who've just graduated from the program, as indeed has my garden. So I'm going to talk about each one of these things, but I suppose if I can encapsulate how I feel about all of that, it's that when I think about soil rather than dirt, I'm thinking about a product which has a mauri, a life essence, has a wairua, a spirit, has a whakapapa. It has some genealogy, and it has a family tree. And every single thing in Te Ao Māori has that. So it's a really important principle, and it's what makes the growing of plants in the soil so important to us as a culture. So, Teresa Reihana, who was, I think, the daughter of Percy Tipene, came up with these images around the various values. Now, Mauri is that thing about that life essence that exists in the soil. So for us, when we grow, it's really important that there is never any upsetting process within the mara. So if somebody has a bit of raru, get out of here. But also things that have a negative impact. When you walk into the 2 gardens I'm involved with, you can feel that energy. You can feel that Modi. It's there. And it's something, I guess, spiritual, but it's really important. So in growing food in a garden, we're always very well aware of how to keep enhancing that Modi, to do things that would not upset that. What is Modi? Well, for me, it really comes down to that whole thing of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, tardigrades, earthworms, that whole 9 yards, and how that all integrates in the soil, but also speaks so succinctly to the roots of plants that exudates. So when the food is produced from the leaves during the day and translated to the body of the plant, at night it gives down to the soil, and that nutrient goes into the soil as exudates to create a communication with all of that microbiology, and that's incredibly important to us. Mana is something about um, how we value people and how we hold them in esteem and how we treat them. So Parakore is a strongly organic-based process, but it's also important to understand that that it has a very strong environmental, spiritual, and social connotation. And Percy would have described it as placing a korowai over the organic production world. So that's how he would have described it. He was Ngāti Hine. Wairua, again, is something that's very important. And in the garden, it's also about how we treat people. It's also understanding that there's a spiritual thing there, and different mara actually exhibit that in different ways. But for us, it's about understanding the spirit of Hiniahuone. It's about understanding that all of those things in the soil have an organic function and purpose. So it's really about that. Whakapapa is a really important thing because it's deeply grounded in a couple of things. One is we need to know the source of everything that goes into our mara. So that's nothing new to you folk in permaculture and organic production. So we need to understand that. But what we try and do is create a circle within the mara where, as much as possible, everything within the mara comes from that area. Now, we're fortunate in having 33 hectares to play with, but the actual mara area that I'll talk about is probably only eight of that, maybe a little more. So whakapapa, really important. I've talked about Māori, and the other one is te ao tūroa. And te ao tūroa, if you like, is understanding that we're all part of a much bigger thing. So we are, and it goes beyond gardening. We heard people talking about that in the journey of permaculture this morning, though it's much bigger than that. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is we need to exhibit as far as possible those principles on the land. In other words, taking responsibility for those things. So at Pourewa, which I'll talk about shortly, we have composting toilets, we have photovoltaic cells, we have a system in the nursery which collects all excess water, treats it, and then brings it back around the system again. We're working very hard as well on trying to produce our own mulch with things like bana grass and other things, so that we have plenty of material which we can turn around and create compost and mulches with. So that's an important part of that. But also, it probably goes a bit back to whakapapa. We see ourselves as the kaitiaki of the ngahere and of the fauna as well, all those critters. And so for that reason, particularly in our nursery production, we're very strong around making sure that we preserve the provenance of the native plants we produce. We produce about 300,000 revegetation plants a year, and we're just shifting to, or pivoting is, I think that's the modern word, we're pivoting towards the production of larger species because a lot of our landscapers are asking for that. So when we understand where we stand in the world, we have to have respect and honour for that. So that's a very important principle. So they're the six principles. So if you wanted to go on this journey, the first stage is kakano, which is the seed, and you have to produce a hua parakore production plan. And so that's quite a big, Leo and others will assert to the fact that that's quite a job in actually pulling that together. But I suppose it's no different to the way you need to approach how you establish an organic certification process. So in Kakano, we have a series of lectures where people can understand those 6 principles and think very carefully about how they manage a garden to meet those needs. The second stage is tupuranga. And in tupuranga, what generally happens is you produce a summary of what improvements you've made. There's usually a visit from a kaitiaki who will come and just have a look at what you're doing and actually provide some advice. And then the final stage is when you get certification. So if anybody's interested in this, go on the Te Waka Kaiora website. We're just enrolling for the next iteration of the program at the moment, and consider a membership of Te Waka Kaiora. We've just moved to a point where we have established takiwā around the country, so those areas of common interest. And for each of those, we have a māngai, a spokesperson, and that spokesperson sits on our board. And then there's 4 people make up the executive from that. So currently my role is secretary. And finally, so what we wanted to do, unlike the battle which people like the folk at the back have had to go through, and ourselves, is to create a support unit within those takiwā. So we can go and look at each other's gardens. We can talk about innovations. I mean, I was writing notes next door, just listening to the atom. So really important to understand those principles. So I went on a bit of a journey. I've been a parks director most of my life, so I've squirted a bit of Roundup and stuff like that around over the years. In fact, I remember when it first arrived, people talked about this wonder chemical. Man, we can just get rid of all of this stuff. Oh, gosh. I've had to plant a lot of trees to satisfy myself that I can assuage my guilt. So what I did is I had worked as an independent director for Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei. They have a trust board, and then underneath that they have 2 boards. One is the operational board, Whaimaia, and the other is the financial board, Whairawa. And so I was an independent board director for 3 years on Whaimaia and became aware that they were getting back a piece of land from a pony club, which had a 40-year lease on it. So I really wanted to explore a couple of things in my later life. One was I'd always had this drive to produce a master's thesis around the evolution of botanic gardens. I've haven't done that, but in that process, talking to different institutions to gain access, the whole idea of marrying my strong interest in te ao Māori and my strong interest in botanic gardens collided with such synergy. It was just amazing and irrepressible. So I retired from the board of Whaimaia, and I took up this role of writing a thesis around the development of an ethnobotanic garden, if you like, but one that would speak very strongly of Māori science, that we call it taongia tuku, those treasures that are handed, or pūrākau is another way of saying it. So we hand on that stick of knowledge to people. And there's some wonderful knowledge. In fact, you know, I've heard there's an argument about is Mātauranga Māori really science? Crikey. About 1,000 years of these things constantly being checked and refined, checked and refined, checked and refined. If that isn't scientific peer review, I don't know what is actually. So the first thing is it is science. And I'll give you a story. Reriata Mahaki, who is Mahurihuri, has done a lot of work around Mātauranga Māori. And what he did was uncover one of those old chants that talked about exactly when piper spawn. And piper spawn for 2 hours every year. And so they looked around for in the chant for what were the tohu, what were the signs when this would happen. And you know they off the mid-north on the east coast, they nailed that time exactly. Man, that's superb. I just think that's wonderful science. So I was enamored with this prospect. I don't think I'll go too much into that because I'd rather tell the story. So this is, I always think of Billy Connolly saying, "This is your country here." Well, this is Tamaki Makaurau, and that's the rohi which represents Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei. They came to Tamaki around 1750 and defeated the Waiōhua people. And at that time, Kiwi Tamaki was the paramount chief, and he resided on our Maunga Kia, or One Tree Hill. And so from that time, they have had ahi ka over this area. They have kept the home fires burning. My people chased them out for a little while, and they took refuge amongst the Tainui people, who we were very grateful for. But they kept coming back and tending the gardens and doing the fishing and the things that represent ahi ka. So this is their area. And if you know Auckland, Rangitoto, this is the harbour, and their area is about here, roundabout. And so this is blowing that area up a bit. And if you know, everybody knows Bastion Point, but we call it Takaparafo. And so that's this area out here, which juts out around the Marine Drive. And so that area is where our marae is. In fact, the marae is just in here. And this is Kupe Street, and this is Keeper Drive. And so this area here is where the garden is. And it almost loops right back around from the Ngāpipi roundabout, if you know that. So that was the area which came back to Ngāti Whātua after the Bastion Point occupation. But at that time it was occupied, or all those areas were reserves under the Reserves Act. And what was really important to Ōrākei was that they got back title to the land. You know, the reason that lands were lost, deliberately or otherwise, is a conflict between English law and the indefeasibility of title, which means as soon as your name is in the title, it cannot be challenged. And the Maori concept, which is plural land ownership. And so people, for whatever reason, wittingly or unwittingly, sold land, and gradually most of the lands which were regarded to be Ōrākei land were lost as a result of that, including Paratai Drive, which some of the most expensive land in Auckland, probably in New Zealand. So that's the layout of the land. And so this is an aerial view of it when we took it over from the Pony Club finally. But what the decision that was made by Ngāti Whātua is they would take title to the land, but they would leave it as reserve land. A very generous gesture. In fact, my dealings with Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei are that they're an incredibly gracious people. That they made something like 19 attempts through the Maori Land Court, through the government, through the council, to actually have some of these land losses addressed. Long story, but so the area that I'm talking about that we've developed is This area here is a nursery. This area here is the Maara, the garden for our wellness plants. This will be a weaver's garden. And over in this area is where we've developed the Parakore. So that's just a map of it. You know, it's funny, you write a thesis and then it all changes. I want to go back and write that thing. So this is the Maara, the Marararanga, the weaver's garden is here. This is a kumara collection. We've now got 15 cultivars, and this is where the Parakore went. And that was a design that, yes, there was. Famous in my own mind. So the design, when I first looked at the design, I was given pretty free range by the trust board, but I thought, how could I represent a garden which would be able to talk about that the way that my ancestors saw the world? So the first thing is, you know, I've talked about Maori and Wairua. Well, there's nothing more energetic than a symbol of a circle. In fact, it's been adopted by the gemologists, and there was actually a gardening system developed in the States called Genesa gardening, which was about that gardening in circle. And some of that went from, you know, having a coop with chickens and then moving the coop and planting in those circles. But the circle was quite deliberate for a number of reasons. I wanted to talk about how any culture understood their universe, and so the deities that have been created down through the ages were created to create an understanding and to create order. So I've been fascinated just by the cultivation that our old people had around the Maara, and there's some lessons for us. They always, you know, there's 52 kupu, I think, in the Rio Rangatira for different types of soil. And it speaks to me about how they modified the soil very significantly to create the most ideal condition. But they also, so this might be entering the world of biochar, but they always burnt off the area first, and then they created these puki, or these little hills, and they planted their kumara into those. And that was, in my mind, and I haven't read it anywhere, so you're hearing it here for the first time, that they must have amended those puki to quite a significant extent. And because they had to bring in materials from all over the place, far more efficient to just have a series of little hills than building a whole bed up, or even a whole furrow. So they certainly did that. I'm just contemplating with the collection I have now that I wouldn't get some manuka this next year when the puki are finished, lay manuka on it and let it dry out and then burn it off. And so that will do that. A lot of the kumara were also planted using gravel or stones to generate extra heat, and so they were planted all over the beds. And the best example of that is the Otuatawa stone fields in Māngere. So they're a very good.
What's the underlying soils on that site? Is it like milk and clay, or are you in the volcanic area?
Where the kumara are, it's really thick kikuyu. So what we've done is put unwoven weed mat over it, and we just built the puki on top of that. That works really well. You know, a kumara, there's two things about it. One is our old people always J planted. So they would take the tipu, or the tupu, if you like, in their hand like that. So the leaves are up here and the roots are down there, and they would go into the soil and pull it along. That meant that the stem, the cutting, would actually go parallel to the ground. And that's where I've actually lifted kumara and seen this, like there's this root and all of the kumara come off there. But the other secret is when they grow down and hit something hard, they swell back up. So talk about always trying to plant it on a hard pan. I don't know if it's true or not, but I have heard about people who built puki on concrete. Roofing iron, yeah. And I think the other thing to really emphasise is, you know, you can be quite staunch about doing things always in the old way, but you never throw out a good idea. And so, you know, there's this whole thing of the he awawhiria, the braiding of the rivers, that knowledge that we bring together, because I reckon when they saw that sailing ship coming in to the Waitemata, they must have thought, what the heck is that? But once they started to bring these various vegetables, life became a lot easier. You know, at one time in the 18th century and into the 19th century, there were over 3,000 acres of gardens around the maunga in Tamaki Makaurau. And so they had that, there's that circular thing again. So there was over 3,000 acres, but they started to be able to grow kāinga and all of these other foods and big potatoes, my goodness. So they were very fortunate in that. So originally they would have had all of the bounty of the forest, the bounty of Haumea Tikitiki, the atua of wild foods. They would have had the foods they brought from wherever they came from, Hawaii. So they had the kumara, they had riwai, they had taro, they had ufi, which was like a little yam. So to be able to supplement that, and if they had a crop failure of kumara particularly, they ate fernroot or aruhe, and so they had to pound that up. And so it's really important that to understand that when we garden in modern time, we do what our tupuna always did and learn from the past and enhance and innovate. So that's a picture of the Maara. So there's about 60 metres across that particular thing, but we also grow on the hillsides around it. And we haven't got the Maramataka compass in the middle, but I've been given the grant to produce that, and so we're working on that currently. So that's the Maara. So it speaks very strongly to a whole range of mātauranga. So it's another shot of it.
Good question. What are you using for cultivation, like rotary hose, pigs, tractors?
No tractors. We've got 5 gardeners work in this space. So we've really worked towards a regenerative model as far as possible. That's our ambition. So we've worked really on how do we create a really flourishing microbiology within the soil. So there's a number of things we do. We use compost extract to soak the roots when we plant young vegetable plants. We continue to use that compost extract for promoting growth. But also, you know, there's we also spray it over the leaves because a really important piece of science in terms of bacteria and fungi is the presence of antagonists. These are things which combat with the whatever's there, and it tends to level out the population. I've just been listening next door to an unerringly similar story that when you live with nature, you can handle a few bugs and things, but nature can also be a helper. So really important that we do that. So we would follow generally an organic method. We use a lot of compost. We create, use worm casts and a whole range of things in there, and we're always playing around to see what gives us better results at different times of the year. And we also make extractions. So if we think we really need some phosphorus, we soak carrot tops in water, and that creates a phosphorus drench. So we try and keep the stuff going around and around. So that's our first kumara crop. Oh, half of it anyway. And since then we've expanded our cultivars quite considerably. In the area that I talked about for the Mararongoa, I really had to go through Rongoa 101. So I didn't know a lot about it. I'm a designer and I'm a certainly a gardener, a horticulturist, and a botanist. But there's a high point on the land, which is why it's called Pourewa, because it means the lookout or the landing. And at one time, Orake would have had a large 10-metre high lookout on top of that point. Now, from that point, you can see Mount Wellington, Maara, you can see One Tree Hill, Mangakiakia, and you can see Mount Eden, Mangawhau. And so when I decided to design this piece, I thought about what would tell about the whakapapa of Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei. So we from these points, each of these paths go to one of our maunga, or to the Ōrākei Basin, or to a place where Tupuriri's brother had his marae. So every path has a kōrero. When the paths began to be developed, and I certainly worked with a number of good rongoa practitioners, people like Donna Kerridge. She ran a series of workshops for us and really started to get people understanding that thing of going into Te Wānui or Tāne, into the forest, and actually understanding what's there, creating a relationship with the ngahere and with the particular rākau that you wanted to take from. This is a different model because I really wanted to bring back what is a very valid medicinal practice, a very valuable health practice, because it's not just plants and animals and clays that were used, it's also the massage and also the spiritual treatment. So those things really encapsulate the whole thing of rongoa Māori. So that rongoa Māori thing is in there. So what I decided to do, because at one time the colonial government banned the use of rongoa entirely. Got to get rid of this witchcraft. So they produced the Tohunga Suppression Act in the early 1900s, and that was only extinguished in the 60s. So we wanted to bring that back into the light, but that there's a thread that I've learned in my world of nature conservation, I suppose, is that people have to first of all know, then they begin to understand, then they begin to appreciate, and finally they value. And not just Maara, but for anything that we want to be revived, the battle for the wilderness will be won and lost in the cities where the electorate can vote. That's where it's won or lost. So for us, we wanted to bring particularly rongoa ngahere, those plants, back into the light. So each one of the paths delineates an area where plants are planted that treat a particular part of the tinama of the body. So the top bed, and again, this has been changed, the top bed is respiration, and we all know things like kumaraho are absolutely excellent for respiratory complaints. Kumaraho and tanekaha bark, even better. And during COVID, our rongoa practitioners were producing this stuff by the bottle for our whānau. So each bed has, it might be respiration, digestive system, one of them is skin, flesh and bones, the nervous system, the reproductive system, and so forth. So those paths delineate where those areas are, and then we're just working on the interpretation at the moment. So this is becoming more like a botanic garden where people can go and get information, but also where we can conduct research. So in the forest, everything is planted or grows just in an organic way. But what we've done with this Maara is we've planted things in blocks. And I've done that deliberately because I don't know how many gardens I've been into around the world. I think, I wonder what that plant is, and there's a label there and a label there, and I wouldn't have a clue. So putting them together makes it more obvious that this is kumaraho, tatramoa, whatever. And so that's important. And then we'll label each plant. It's hope that for Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei we can make Pourewa a centre of excellence around Rongoa Māori. So that's an ambition. Yeah. So that's sort of the end of my presentation. But I think importantly, all of the food that's produced in Marakai feeds our whānau. We don't sell it. Although we are now producing honey, you can buy Iraqi gold, and we are beginning to cultivate native mushrooms. There's 3 varieties that we can grow, and we think we might start to use those in boutique specialist restaurants. So there might be a cash flow there, and of course the nursery is used for our own revegetation, but also for planting around the maunga in Tamaki, for influencing landscapers to plant more of our precious taonga. You know, the nurseries tend to get into producing cultivars, and more they get away from what the wild type was. So we want to bring back the authenticity of those wild types. So we pay very careful attention to collecting seed from plants which we know have a Tamaki provenance. That's our kaitiaki responsibility. But also stimulating, I mean, one of the plants that's really been lost from the landscape to a large extent is tawapo. Now, tawapo is a wonderful evergreen, glossy green tree which grows from the north down to about down into the Coromandel and a little below that. And it used to produce, or it does produce, very hard beads, very hard seeds. But it's just a fabulous plant. Kōwhai nutukaka, the kakabeak, is now only found growing on an island in the Kaipara. And while I'm on about Kaipara, really interesting that name talks about the parafume and how it was a source of food. So we work more and more towards trying to influence that. We see ourselves, along with the other iwi and tamaki, as kaitiaki. We see that we're looking forward to the day when Y262, which is a claim about Maori right to those original plants, when that can be satisfied. And so, yeah, I think I'll go towards Pātai now. Yeah, hata Pātai. Gotcha.
Rob, the garden is open for visitors, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's a public park.
Yeah. Having been there a couple of times, I just find it spectacular. It's so beautiful. When you walk through there, you can actually feel the energy. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I just can't help but think how enormously generous Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei are that they open this
Yep.
to everybody. It's amazing.
Look, the dream is, apart from the Sapa Botanic Garden, the dream, the Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei went to the uri of Tupuriri, and so those people who had that descent, and through most of 2017 had workshops around the Motu and also in Poihākana and Sydney. And out of that, they developed a 50-year vision for both Takaparafo and Pourewa. And their vision for Pourewa is certainly the development of this ethnobotanic garden and a knowledge base. And just imagine this, that at the entrance there'll be a carved waharoa. Along the road, Kepa Road, there'll be about 12 to 14 po carved of our tupuna. When you come down into the garden, you'll see that Maramataka compass, and turn east, and there is Tamanui Te Rā standing there carved. There'll be a carved pātaka as well, and this will all be interpreted as you would expect a modern botanic garden to be. So I've done a lot of really interesting things in my career, but man, this is the icing on the cake. It really is. So you're free to walk through that place at any time. Their vision is that most of that 33 hectares will otherwise be revegetated in as close to the original forest as possible. There's some challenges. Gosh, there's a lot of privet on that land. And on that privet is some of our native lichens. So there's a bit of a dilemma about how we manage that. So they want to reforest it, leave a clearing where our rangatahi can camp and come and get food from the Maara and cook it themselves. They always came through the Pourewa Creek into Oraki Basin to go out into the Waitemata. So they always had their waka, their fishing waka, down at the bottom of this particular piece of land. So they're going to build a waka armour centre down there as well. So there's a wonderful vision here. And there'll be walking trails through it. So I guess if I can put on my once Director of Regional Parks hat, I can say that I see this as a superb regional park. Yeah. Other questions, please? Yeah.
You mentioned soil a few times in your talks, and it's like my passion and expertise. I was wondering if you can expand a little bit on any traditional methods, or you talked about amendments that were used.
Yep.
And if you explore any of those amendments for native trees that rely so much on the soil forest.
Well, isn't it amazing that all those forests have survived without anybody putting an ounce of anything on them? Geez, that tells you something. Look, we have followed a lot of Elaine Ingham's learnings. So we do use mycorrhiza at the point of dusting for the seeds. You can purchase these biological inoculations. You can purchase those, and we've done that, but more and more we want to close that system and be producing really good, healthy compost and being able to take extracts from that. So we think that's our future. So what is it about? That's ensuring that we have a really vibrant microbiology. I work on a Tuesday at another garden, which is Dignan Street in Point Chevalier, and that's a former bowling green. And it's just turned into a wonderful garden. And Rebecca Swan is the leader there, and she's done Elaine Ingham's course. And we have 2 microscopes with camera capacity, and we can analyse any piece of soil or and just see what the health of it is. So one of our planks for Growing Point, which is the entity that runs that particular thing, is to understand how best to produce a microbiology rich medium. And so we're always experimenting. We do a lot of hot composting. We also do some Johnson Sioux. And so we've sort of covered those bases. But I think the important thing is to understand what's in your soil. And I think more and more the kind of analysis which Bex can do will become more common. And that just tells you whether you're on the right track or not, you know. So using a bit more science in that is really important. And we've been on quite a journey with our Maara at Pourewa. And when we created that Maara, it was solid clay. And I dug holes just to satisfy myself that I was doing the right thing, because it was a cut and fill area for the nursery. But I wanted to deep rip that area and then build the garden on top. But people who are much smarter than me said, no, that wasn't necessary. So we built the garden up, and in my ignorance, what I did is I imported a mixture of 50% soil, 50% compost. And man, stuff grew like anything in the first year, but then it all collapsed. Too high a carbon content in the soil itself. And we started to see the folly of kind of building this thing on top of virtually a clay pan. So we're working our way around that. In fact, we retreat to the hills a bit in the winter, where there's none of that going on. And so for us to understand how to revive and nourish Hiniahuoni and Papa, it's really been to get an insight into what that population's like, and it's really starting to improve. So we do things like chemical tests beginning and the end of the year. We do the tests on what's our worm count. what's our penetration like, and some of those things, and also an analysis of the microorganisms. And I've got a cheap way of doing that. Right.
How do you feel now about biochar?
About
Biochar.
We've just started using it. In fact, I went out for a 5-minute visit at Betsy's and came away 2 hours later, much richer for understanding her stories. Just wonderful. So we are putting biochar now into our compost, and we've only been doing that for about a year, and some of those results look really good. And maybe that's going back to that whole thing of our tupuna, burning off what was there and then using that, creating a nutrient. The other thing you just asked about is some of those other things. Look, what I say is there's nothing wrong with making a mistake once. Oh, you can make it twice, maybe. But what I really encourage our kaimahi to do is to be inventive and to think around how do we do different things. So we've had a woman coming into the garden periodically and talking about how we can use these different additives. So using comfrey, using a borage, using carrot tops, using onion skins, bananas and the like. And so we've got those things there from time to time, but we're not all that scientific about the way we're using it, to be quite honest. Yeah.
Are you using those for liquid fertilisers or to
Liquids, yeah, liquids. Other partai.
Yeah, kia ora, Rob. Just wondering about scalability. Like, this is so fantastic. Is there potential to grow this into other areas of Auckland and some of the park reserves? I say that because I work for a small trust here in Taranaki, and we're trying to work with the council on a lot of just grass, reserve land that's really doesn't really use. And we've set up a few community gardens here, but it's a real struggle because we're trying to get funding. We find you have to fund a coordinator because it's really good to have someone that can coordinate, not just leave it to the community. I'm just wondering if you've got experience of that. Or
Look, I haven't touched on food sovereignty. And those of you who've read Jessica's books will understand where she comes from, but it comes from a particular conference. And it's like the freedom to know what's in your food, the freedom to have access to it, the freedom around that whole production, and a really important principle in Te Ao Māori, which goes to one of our values, is reciprocity. So it's that whole thing of we happily give. We don't expect to receive, but invariably we do when people understand that kaupapa. So, sorry, just do your question again. I'm an old fella.
Just wondering how.
Oh, yeah.
I
got it again. Yeah.
Great ideas and concepts and make it work.
Look, the first thing is that I'm beginning to see, since I became interested in this particular area of horticulture, just the enormous swell of Maara being created around iwi, particularly because it's like, how do we afford this kai? So and the important thing is to understand, more important than that, is it mahinga kai? Is it the kai grown in our traditional way, respecting our deities? So I can see that's beginning to happen very significantly. I just love the work of Garden to Table. That's amazing. And there's nothing like harvesting to hook a young kid into horticulture. I've just seen them getting around a kumara bed and you think, wow, if I could bottle this. So there's all of that going on. And I think in my career, I was a parks director in the 70s. I've just seen the demise of neighbourhood parks. So now we have regional playgrounds. Play is dramatically different. People could understand a sports field and, you could go and fly a kite and do all of those things. But we tend to work on metropolitan parks now.